Iowa snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Nebraska snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Things stay the same, even in all the chaos. There's nothing new under the sun, or however that saying goes. Iowa beat Nebraska 13-10 in a game that, look, the Cornhuskers, they were statistically the better team. They looked like the better team. They had 334 total yards to Iowa's 164. They had 2 turnovers. Iowa had none, but still that huge yardage differential should still favor the Huskers even with those turnovers. They had 20 first downs to Iowa's 5. And 30, I'm going to get mad like I did Ohio State, Michigan. 39 minutes of possession. And you tell me that this team lost? What are we doing? What are we doing, Matt Rhule? That's the question of the week. The only reason people aren't making fun of Matt Rhule or questioning him more is because of what Ryan Day did. And here's the good news if you're a Nebraska fan. Nebraska's 6-6, 3-6, and they're better than they were last year. It may not feel like it because of how the defense has gotten exposed at times, but outside of Michigan last year, you never played a competent offense. I mean, even Colorado's offense last year was pretty incompetent. This season, Colorado's offense was better. You destroyed them. Iowa's offense was competent for the most part of this season. You shut them down in this game. You limited USC's offense. You shut down Ohio State's offense before the McLaughlin injury. And yeah, I mean, Indiana boat raced you, but Indiana's been boat racing every team with comparable talent. And they were at home, and they had an extra week to prepare. And I mean, Illinois had a way better offense than they did last year. So you faced better offenses this year compared to last year in the aggregate. That's probably why the defense dropped off. It's a similar story with Iowa, too, if we're being honest. I mean, Iowa's defense returned a ton. Last year they did have some issues just because of the talent they have, and it's hard to have a perfect unit. But they faced some better offenses this year with some better athleticism than they did last year, and they got exposed. They did, but not here. Iowa won 13-10, despite the fact that Nebraska had over 300 offensive yards. Nebraska only scored 10 points. Here's an impact statistic. If I tell you this statistic, you know that Iowa wins. Iowa forced 5 fumbles, and they recovered 2. Now, that's not an impressive recovery percentage, but the fact they forced 5 fumbles implies that they're probably getting pressure on the quarterback because running backs don't fumble that much. And then they recovered 2 of them, so they probably win the turnover battle because Iowa doesn't throw the ball that much and they certainly don't fumble. And I give you this too. The fact that they hold Nebraska to 334 yards and 4.4 yards per play, and on top of that, they're turning it over that much, that means Nebraska probably doesn't score all that many points. And if you want to beat Iowa, you kind of have to score in the 20s. You can't score in the teens because Iowa finds ways, whether with turnovers or now that they have an offense, you get a long Caleb Johnson run, or in this game it was a halfback pass, which is particularly humiliating. They find ways to hit. They find ways to hit the 20s now, or at least the upper teens. So you have to get in the 20s to ensure win, especially with it being on the road in an environment like this. I tell you this before the game, and if you're betting on Nebraska, you're probably tempted to sell. Or cancel your bets and kind of hammer Iowa. Turns out that's not what happened, because then I would also tell you Iowa only had 5 first downs. Then you probably think Nebraska wins. Whoops. That's not what happened, because this game was a lot like what happened the following day with Ohio State versus Michigan. It was insane. It was crazy to watch. I mean, Iowa used special teams and defense to win. That's no surprise there. 2 of 2 on field goals, 9 punts for 364 yards, 40.4 yards per punt, and they had 4 sacks and 8 TFLs. I mean, you look at the data here. Iowa had 40.4 yards per punt. Nebraska had 34.9 yards per punt. Nebraska had one punt return for no yards. Iowa had one punt return for 25 yards. So the hidden yardage benefited Iowa. Nebraska had to go on longer drives. Iowa had shorter drives. I mean, 2 of their field goals were made on drives where they gained like an average of 1 yard per drive, and they got 2 field goals off of that. That's how good Iowa's field position was. Iowa had 2 kick returns for 56 yards, average of 28 yards per return. Nebraska had 2 for only 36, though, average of 18. So again, hidden yardage benefited Iowa. Special teams benefited Iowa. And those 4 sacks, those 8 TFLs, they were getting pressure. When Nebraska ran the football, they often got a push. But when Nebraska had to pass block, that's where the issues began to arise, especially as the game went on. And I think Phil Parker was better able to figure out this Iowa offense. The great defensive coordinators, the great defensive minds, or defenses that at least have decent minds, like okay minds, but elite players. Defenses with those combinations, they get better as the game goes on, even when they're on the field for 40 minutes. And Iowa's defense was on the field for 40 minutes. But they won because their defense is that good. They're deep. They made penalties that were intelligent penalties. Like when their guys were beat, they just dragged down those Nebraska receivers because we're not letting you score a touchdown. And Nebraska only scored 1 touchdown, a rushing touchdown. Even with those receivers who made some big plays or had the opportunity to make some big plays but didn't, Iowa never let them score a passing touchdown. Didn't do it. What was not surprising, was confused as to what section I want to talk about. We'll get into that in a few, which was a bit surprising. Kirk Ferentz, I want to get to this very quickly, very briefly. He's a conflicted legend, and I think a game like this shows that. You imagine on one hand what they would be with a good offense, and you think to yourself, this guy's a failure. But on the other hand, these wins are epic because they shouldn't be possible, and yet they're happening. Think of last year, 13-10 Iowa. Iowa missed a bunch of field goals. Iowa let a deep passing touchdown happen on their secondary. They won because they picked off Nebraska in Nebraska's territory. Their backup running back ran for 20 yards to center the field goal, and their backup kicker kicked the field goal to win. That's legend-type stuff. Think of last year. If Cooper DeJean, if that call against Minnesota is changed and he returns that punt for a touchdown, that's a legendary win that if you're an Iowa fan, you'll forever remember. If you're a Minnesota fan, you'll forever remember as well in a negative way. Same thing with the Michigan State game last year. Michigan State had an extra 100 yards, but Iowa forced like 5 turnovers and had a punt return for a touchdown that broke the game open. That's legend stuff. Think of 2017 against Ohio State where they just, like Brycen Ferentz of all people, blows OSU out of the water. Legend stuff. Think about 2002 where they lose to Iowa State at home, but are 11-1 and they go to the Rose Bowl, and depending on what happened in that final week of the regular season, they were in the national title, the BCS national title conversation. Legendary stuff to do that at Iowa. So he has a conflicted legacy, of course, with, imagine what he did on offense. He's a very stubborn guy, very conservative guy schematically, and he's not adapted the program. He's not kept it in the best shape, in my opinion. But also, a lot of these things that he's doing are, from a standpoint of winning football, just admirable and epic. And I think the Hawkeye program consequentially is in a good place. I mean, think of Caleb Johnson, and what was shocking about this game was the fact that one of Iowa's first downs came on what was a 72-yard touchdown reception on a pass that was probably meant to go only 5 to 10 yards. Caleb Johnson just kept trucking through his tacklers, broke them, had breakaway speed and acceleration, and you saw it on the camera. You saw you saw the whole stadium erupt. I mean, the camera was shaking. Effort, 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 effort. That right there, that is the epitome of Iowa football and the mentality that they have. So this program, I think, for Iowa is in a good place. The team for Nebraska, however, is still in a rebuilding phase. They went 6-6, could have gone 8-4, 9-3 if things went differently. They also could have gone 5-7 if things went differently too. So the fact they're going to a bowl game is good, and they did it with a freshman quarterback and some new pieces, a coaching change in the middle of the season. So I think that I don't know what to think. I think the season's a little bit of a disappointment because they only went 6-6 after 5-7, but they're still going to a bowl game, so there is some improvement for the Cornhuskers. You look at Nebraska and Matt Rhule. I think one of their bigger weaknesses is that they're coordinator dependent. I think that's something that's very clear with Nebraska, with Matt Rhule, is Rhule's just coordinator dependent. After this year, I've kind of likened him to what a Nebraska version of James Franklin would be like. He's not good at managing games, and his decision-making is a little bit questionable. I mean, they've been inconsistent all year. Sometimes they come out on fire. Other times they come out flat. That's a culture issue. Schematically, there's sometimes, one game with Marcus Satterfield, they're running a bunch of screens. The other game, they abandon it completely. One game with Dana Holgorsen, like they look very physical and dominant offense against Wisconsin at home. Against Iowa, they completely fold up in the second half and call some questionable plays there. I think he's coordinator dependent, and it's not a good thing, but it's a thing that can be negated a little bit if you hire the right guys. I think Tony White's a good DC. I think Dana Holgorsen's a good OC. Are they great? I think that's yet to be seen, and I think there probably do need to be more, changes to the staff, especially at the wide receiver coach position and maybe some other places. And they need to recruit better, and they are, which is good. And they probably need to use the portal more heavily than they did the last time around, and I think they will. But in this game, it became pretty clear to me that Rhule is coordinator dependent. He is. So that's something that I wanted to point out here and talk about as well, because they're inconsistent, and that falls on the head coach. And it's not just coaching staff or decisions, it's also players and execution and these different things. So that's that. The defense, though, to finish off on a positive note, they played their hearts out. Tony White, I think he's here to stay. Maybe he will get a head coaching opportunity, but that's not something that I can determine or you can determine. That's something that depends on largely circumstances and the dominoes falling. Iowa was held to 49, I almost said 99 because it's so unbelievable, 49 rushing yards and 1.9 yards per carry, and 115 passing yards and 7.7 yards per attempt. And 72 of those came on one play. And that wasn't due to schematics. That was due to tackling. That was due to effort. And that was a superhuman play by Caleb Johnson. A little disappointing by Nebraska, but that type of stuff falls on the head coach or the strength and conditioning coach, where you just get outpowered like that, or you don't give that type of effort. That does not fall on Tony White there. They played their hearts out. It's the same thing with OSU. This loss falls on the CEO and the offense. It does not fall on the defense. They played their hearts out. The Black Shirts did, and they deserve to be called the Black Shirts now. This is another good defense. Frustrating at times, yeah, but they're good. They're great. They did their job against Iowa. They saw limited offense, and they attacked it. It was ultimately their own offense and offensive line and also special teams that let them down in this game. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Connor OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Slay and Ismar and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Josh Ferguson, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Blue and go Buckeyes.